The quarters of Buckingham Palace had been silent for months, the air heavy with speculation and whispers that clung to every tapestry and gilded. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, had vanished from the public eye, her absence fueling rumors of frailty, fractures, and fading influence. Yet, like a phoenix that refuses to be consumed by its ashes, she re-emerged, stronger, sharper, and more commanding than ever before. Her comeback was not merely a return, it was a seismic shift that rattled the very foundation of the British monarchy, setting off a chain reaction that neither King Charles nor Prince William could have foreseen. The moment Kate stepped out of the sleek black car before the palace gates, the flashbulbs erupted like 1,000 miniature storms. She wore not just an outfit but an armor of intent, a sharply tailored deep emerald coat that whispered power and resilience, a symbol that the princess had not only healed but had evolved. William, standing a few paces behind, allowed the faintest of smiles to escape his carefully rehearsed. His wife was back, and with her return came the promise of restored stability to a family teetering on the edge of public disdain. But for King Charles, observing the scene from a distance within the shadowed windows of his study, the sight was less reassuring and more unsettling. For in Kate's poised stance and the roar of the public's adoration, he saw something dangerous, a threat to the fragile equilibrium of his reign. The months of her absence had created a vacuum, one that Charles had quietly tried to fill with his own vision of modern monarchy, subdued, deliberate, and deeply reliant on the loyalty of those closest to. Yet loyalty in Buckingham had always been a currency traded in whispers, and with Kate gone, cracks had formed between the old king and the heir. William had grown more restless, more determined to carve out his own narrative, one less shackled to the shadows of his father's cautious legacy. Her return, therefore, was not just the re-emergence of a beloved princess but the ignition of a dormant. As the palace staff scrambled to adjust to the new dynamics, Kate wasted no time in reclaiming her. Within days, she chaired meetings that Charles had postponed for weeks. Her presence alone brought a sense of urgency that neither courtiers nor advisors. Invitations that once collected dust on the king's desk or suddenly revived under her guidance. Charities long neglected found themselves back in the royal calendar, and media outlets that had speculated about her demise now sang her praises with renewed fervor. William, visibly lighter in her company, began to step more boldly into the limelight, his speeches carrying a conviction that had waned during her absence. But power, in the royal ecosystem, is rarely gained without resistance. Charles, already wearied by health concerns whispered about in tabloids but never fully confirmed, felt the weight of her resurgence like a titan. Advisors close to him muttered warnings of overexposure, of a princess whose popularity could eclipse that of a king struggling to maintain role. Late-night calls between the sovereign and his most trusted confidants painted a picture of a monarch both proud and perturbed, torn between admiration for her effectiveness and fear of her growing influence over the public, and over his own son. Behind closed doors, the tension thickened. One evening, in a gilded drawing room lit by the flickering glow of antique lamps, a heated discussion erupted between father and William, emboldened by Kate's return, pushed for a more proactive royal schedule, one that placed the Princess of Wales front and center. Charles, his face lined with the strain of both age and ailment, resisted. "This is not the time for spectacle," he warned, his voice carrying the weight of decades. But William's reply was curt, almost defiant: "The people don't want silence anymore. They want presence. They want her." Outside that chamber, the narrative had already begun to shift. Newspapers flashed her photographs across front pages: Kate's triumph. The people's princess reborn. William and Kate, the future arrived. The king's image, by contrast, receded into the background, his cautious appearances seeming more like relics of an era fading too slowly to make way for the inevitable. Kate, for her part, played her role with masterful ambiguity. To the public, she was gracious, measured, even deferential to the king but to those who worked in her orbit, there was a steely resolve, a new edge to her charm that left no room for missteps. She had endured absence, endured speculation, and now she wielded her second chance like a blade. Behind every carefully curated smile was a calculation, how each appearance, each speech, each gesture would cement her position not only as the wife of a future king but as a central architect of the monarchy. In the weeks that followed, her influence became impossible to ignore. Major events were reoriented around her schedule. International dignitaries requested her presence specifically. Even within the Commonwealth, whispers arose of a new era being shaped not by the frail hand of a weary monarch but by the steady, deliberate touch of a princess who had learned to wield soft power with ruthless precision. Charles, watching from the confines of his private chambers, could only retreat, first symbolically, then practically, as his appearances dwindled further, citing exhaustion, then health, then the vague but telling phrase, "the need for." Royal aides described the atmosphere as polite but polarized. There were no open conflicts, no dramatic public fallout. Instead, the war was one of optics, of presence versus absence, of vigor versus vulnerability. William, ever the loyal son in public, now privately aligned more with his wife's vision than his father's, sensing that the monarchy's future might hinge on their generation's willingness to seize it. In private, he admitted to confidants that he felt relieved by her return, as though the burden of transition had finally found its natural leader, not in the crown he would one day wear, but in the woman who had reclaimed her throne beside. And the public? They chose their side with a fervor that no palace did. Crowds swelled at her appearances. Social media crowned her with hashtags that bordered on adoration. Commentators spoke of her as the beacon of resilience, the savior of the weak. The narrative had shifted, perhaps irrevocably. The princess had come back, and in doing so, she had rewritten the hierarchy of influence. Charles, in one of his rare addresses following her resurgence, offered a carefully worded statement of unity: "We are, as ever, a family first, a monarchy." But even his most devoted supporters sensed the weariness in his tone, the unspoken acknowledgement that the tide had turned and that his retreat was less a strategy than a surrender to his health, once a closely guarded matter, now became a convenient veil behind which he could step aside without the spectacle of abdication. By the time the year drew to a close, the palace had unofficially Kate at the forefront, William as the steady hand beside her, and Charles, still the king, but in title more than in influence, occupying a quieter, almost. The princess's comeback had not merely been a return to duty, it was a quiet, relentless coup, a reshaping of power conducted not through decree or defiance but through the irresistible force of public will. For those who remembered her absence, the transformation was breathtaking. For those who had doubted her, it was a warning. And for the monarchy, it was a reminder that in a house built on legacy, sometimes survival does not belong to the crown alone, but to the one who dares to step out of the shadows and take the light.